we have a quick round of introduction? We didn't get a chance to
Yeah, I know.
from outside LLF as well.
Yeah, so please.
My name is Shakti. I'm from Room to Read. I work as a program director.
Nice meeting you, Shakti.
Hi, my name is Supriya. I'm with LLF. It's been 4 years and I'm in the academic team.
Great.
मैं हिना हूँ और मैं भी पिछले 4 सालों से LLF में काम कर रही हूँ और एकेडमिक टीम का हिस्सा हूँ.
Great.
My name is Uttam.
Hello, my name is Gajendra and I am working here since last 8 months and I am working in the academic team.
हेलो मैम, मेरा नाम विशाल है और मैं 2020 से LLF में एकेडमिक टीम का पार्ट.
Great.
थैंक यू.
Hi, I'm Kratika. I'm from Pratham.
Pratham.
Hi, I'm Ria. I work in the academic team. I lead the ECE projects at LLF.
At LLF, right.
My name is Vandana Kapoor and I work with the CIP team at Central Square Foundation.
Right.
I am Shweta. I am Associate Director leading the Continuous Professional Development team here.
I'm Sunisha. I work with UNICEF as part of the UNICEF education team.
Right, right, great.
Bhagyalakshmi, and I again work with Room to Read with Shakti sir.
Hello ma'am, I'm Vinod and associated with LLF for last 2 years, around 2 years, and working with professional development team. Yeah.
Great.
I'm Ramesh. I'm leading the academic team here in LLF.
Great.
हेलो मैम, मेरा नाम सहदेव है. मैं LLF के साथ 4 साल से ज़्यादा से काम कर रहा हूँ और मैं कंटिन्यूस प्रोफेशनल डेवलपमेंट टीम में काम करता हूँ.
Nice.
नमस्ते, मेरा नाम स्वाति है. मैं कंटिन्यूअस प्रोफेशनल डेवलपमेंट टीम के साथ काम करती हूँ.
Great.
Hello ma'am, this is Meenu. I have been working with the CPD team for around 2.5 years now.
Great.
Yeah, I'm Manu. I'm also working in the continuous professional development team with LLF.
Excellent.
I'm Smriti and working in multilingual education unit here, LLF, at LLF.
Dheer Jingran, Language and Learning Foundation.
Great, great.
Professor Lina Mukhopadhyay with us, and she is professor and head the Department of Training and Development in English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. She has a vast experience in multilingual education. She has contributed the Multi-Leela project. You must have heard about that. We are here to interact with her, and I'm requesting Dr. Dheer to say about something. Professor Lina.
I'll tell you about how I met Lina, and this was the Multi-Leela project, as you were saying, and this was British Council was the kind of umbrella there, but there were I think University of Cambridge, University of Reading were involved, and this was done in Bihar, Hyderabad and Delhi, I think.
Delhi, absolutely.
And this was 2017 to 20, and I met Lina, I think, first time in Cambridge, when we had gone there to discuss this project. And I was really impressed with, her depth of research understanding around linguistics, especially applied linguistics. She was willing to soil her hands with what can happen in a program. I mean, sometimes you have researchers who just do theoretical work. So we've kept in touch since then, and since you were going to be here in NCR, I thought it's a good occasion to understand more of what your research is, and also then of course see how we can draw upon that.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Lina, for coming.
Thank you so much for having me here, and we will hopefully have a productive discussion today, and we'll all have takeaways from each other's work. So the presentation that I would do would take roughly about 55 to 60 minutes, but of course feel free to interrupt me and ask for any further details, because all of it is a huge work in progress. So none of it is definitive, all of it is dynamic, interactive, and we are learning on the go. So the concepts and the perspectives as well as a bit of application that they just mentioned in the classroom context, I would be presenting. So this has a history from Multilila, which we started off in 2016 and went on till 2020. And then due to the pandemic, our work was stalled for almost 2.5 years. But we had got 2 more fundings, as I was just discussing before the presentation, that you know, Cambridge and British Academy saw the worth of what we were doing, and we applied and we got 2 more fundings. But they were again on hold for a long period of 2 years, and then with several extensions, we finally managed to start them off last year, because everything was hands-on. We had to go to the site to collect data, to train the teachers. So that's why I'm giving you this brief background. So we had got 2 twin fundings for 2 twin projects. One was a reading development project, where we would be focusing deeply on the development of reading, its sub-skills and its precursors in terms of vocabulary knowledge and syntactic awareness. And of course, we also had a test on general cognitive ability. So that was one project, and we were supposed to map the children's growth over a period of 1 year. And alongside, we had another project which was funded by the British Council London resources, and there we got the funding to train teachers using the pedagogy that we had found to be present in the Multilila project, and we thought we would do it more systematically. So that was the you know, motivation for looking at this pedagogy of translanguaging in a very systematic manner. And I would say it was quite rigorous, because the teachers at the end of the day, when they began working with us, they were a bit reluctant, but then as we proceeded along with them, we've realized that it is a lot for them to take on, but then they you know, very readily accepted what we were doing with them. And for a period of almost 5 to 6 months, we went into their classes. So they were 20 teachers from 10 government schools whom we trained in a very methodical manner, and our team of RAs were in touch with them, and they would help them to develop the lesson plans, have discussions with them prior to the classes, post classes. So it was a very immersive and a holistic process, and maybe whatever outcomes we got to see, and we are yet to analyze the data. Whatever outcomes we are able to see, maybe one of the reasons could be because we could get them in our fold, you know, those 20 teachers, and they were very enthusiastic, and they were very regular in what we were doing. However, what we also felt that certain things we could not reach out to the state government. We are still you know, trying our best to do that, but this is the background. Then comprehension is a cognitive linguistic process which happens in the mind, and so in multilingual children's brain, there is a seamless connection between languages as well as comprehension skills. So we looked at the concept of comprehension, and also, as I mentioned, the precursors of comprehension as vocabulary knowledge and syntactic awareness. So we were kind of you know, trying to train the teachers to handle all of this, but as I said, that it was a lot of things to handle. So in some places we were successful, some of the things we were not so successful. So I will probably end my discussion with that. So what we will do is, we could go to the next slide. Yes. So we would have this presentation in 2 parts. So in the first part, we will look at the concept of translanguaging. I'm sure all of you know a lot about it already, but I will just be summing up the important parts, and then we will quickly look at the key aspects in early reading development. So literacy, I think most of us are working in that area. And then we will look at the use of TLP or translanguaging pedagogy in a reading class. So how we could use it and why we could use it. And then in the next part of the presentation, the third slide, I would show some demonstrations from the 2 projects, as I said, twin projects. So the first one is developing ESL reading using the translanguaging pedagogy. So that's for the learners. So that was the first project from British Academy. And the second project, which went hand in hand, was the teacher training project. So these 2 projects, we will look at the background, the methodology that we followed in the projects, and some preliminary findings and some troubleshooting that we are doing. And now we have got 2 more fundings from Cambridge, and we are going to move into multilingual assessment. So that is yet to begin. So we will begin that from July, when the new session starts. Right, so let's move on to, we can skip, the next slide. So this is, I'll just look at this number so you can also follow that. Slide number 4. So now we go to the next slide, slide number 5. This is a kind of a summary of research that we have on bilinguals or multilingual. So I'm using the terms synonymously, but they are applicable to both set of learners or children. So what we know of bi-multilinguals is like a contrast. If you look at the box on the left hand side, that monolinguals can perform only with one language, and many a times in the global north countries, what they do is they capitalize on this concept of linguistic purity, attainment of mastery level attainment, etc., etc. However, this is heavily in contrast with what bi-multilinguals can do. So, so we can look at the diagram, the circle. So we begin from there. So bi-multilinguals have simultaneous access to 2 or more languages in the brain, and we look into the world with a prism, whereas monolinguals look at it with like a glass, like the specs that I am wearing probably. But if I were to have a prism, then how would my world look like? So that is the world of the bi-multilinguals, which is in heavy contrast with the monolingual world. So when we look at the linguistic cognitive ability of multilinguals, which have been long proven through research in different multidisciplinary fields like psychology, brain studies, cognition, literacy research, so on and so forth, that we have been able to now tap 3 types of unique behavior that multilinguals or bilinguals have. One is that they can heavily participate in this concept of translation, which gives us a direct evidence that we have an interplay of languages in the mind, that there is a unique repertoire and we can draw from those mental resources, and that is why we can translate from one language to another. So this is a unique multilingual, bilingual behavior not present in monolinguals at all. Then we have the concept of code switching, which is more at the communicative level. So translation can be looked at the beginning as a written behavior. Of course, we can also translate in the oral modality as well, but in research we have looked at translation as a written behavior. As opposed to that, we have code switching. So code switching, we don't look at utterances or sentences in totality, but we have the enmeshing of languages at different levels. So it could be at the phonological level, it could be at the syntactic level, lexical level, where a group of speakers, hearer speakers who share similar languages, pocket of languages, they spontaneously use resources from each other languages, because what is most important for them is the communication aspect. So they wish to convey their messages. So they are not worried about which syntax, which vocabulary, etc. So that is the primary goal which motivates code switching. Again, gives us another cognitive evidence that languages are enmeshed in the human brain and we can readily draw from them. Also, research in cognition shows that a bi-multilingual learner, when they are in a speech medium, that multiple languages in their brain is activated, and they constantly juggle between those activated languages and suppress some to help others come into production. So it is like a mental gym. That is what I tell my students, that we have a mental gymnasium and we work really hard at it, so our muscles grow really fast, and that is the reason why we can do this kind of of a sophisticated behavior, you know, that code switching always takes into account the speaker-hearer's relationship, the linguistic repertoire that they share, so on and so forth. So it is actually a very sophisticated choice of language use, and not like using languages as crutch, and you know, we have different other political terminologies like Creole and, you know, half known languages and things like that. But cognitively, if we were to look at research in a very serious manner, we realize that it is a very sophisticated human behavior. And then we have the third aspect, which is more or less similar to code switching, but it is only you know, that multilingual behavior that we look at in the classroom context. So classroom context, the teacher, the learners participate in communicative acts, as well as they participate in acts of comprehension, language production, so on and so forth. So when we use multiple language resources in a systematic manner for pedagogical purposes, it gives rise to the concept of translanguaging. So translanguaging draws heavily from translation and code switching, but it is like, you know, more in a structured manner, which would not be present outside of the classroom context, because we don't need that kind of a systematic planned communication when we you know, communicate outside class, because we don't have the motivation of like maybe making a presentation, you know. So people would laugh at us if we would talk to our friends making a presentation, isn't it? So these are three unique bi-multilingual behavior, and as a result of it, if you look at the box here, that we experience a lot of cognitive benefits, and it gives rise to a lot of cognitive flexibility. And in recent research, we also see that when we look at the cognitive ability as a general ability, you know, to understand and make meaning out of our worldly experience, we also are able to have a heightened experience of theory of mind, meaning that we are able to include other individuals in our mental world, think about them, be more sensitive, and always have that kind of an internal dialogue in our mind that the world is not only from my perspective, but it is from others' perspectives as well. And then of course it gives rise to more creativity and critical thinking skills, and this happens as we have this seminal research by Jean Grosjean that you know, she summarizes that because jointly activated languages are always in conflict with each other, so they are all activated, we have to suppress according to the needs of the situation, and that gives rise to a heightened cognitive flexibility and you know, functioning. So that is the uniqueness of bi-multilingual behavior, which we wanted to capitalize in education. So we can go to the next slide.
Question.
Yes, sure.
So are you saying that translanguaging is always purposive and planned? Because some people have talked about, they talk about natural translanguaging.
Yes, yes. I'm going to come to that.
Okay. But since you said translanguaging is always systematically planned.
Systematic in the sense that we understand translanguaging as opposed to code switching in terms of what happens in the classroom context. But beyond that, there are subtypes of translanguaging which we will also be looking at.
Just a corollary to that question.
Yeah.
So would you say that translanguaging is only for the classroom setting or any formal setting?
Well, I have not looked into research in that. So because we are looking at you know, primary education, and where we are looking at conscious use of languages. So even when teachers resort to, you know, code switching in class, she has a pedagogical objective in mind, which may not be present when we are talking with, let's say, friends, or maybe we are traveling. So that is the reason we demarcate between code switching and translanguaging. But as I said, that they all refer to the concept that in our brain as multilinguals, we can access multiple resources of languages and can do several things with that. So for example, if we look at, you know, prototypically, if we look at translation, it is a writing behavior. It happens in the oral medium as well. So translation as an oral behavior, as a written behavior, we would look at formation of sentences. Whereas in code switching, we are not worried about sentence formation. We are looking at the inclusion of more languages at different levels, depending on the needs and the proficiency levels of the hearer speaker. So phonological level, lexical level. So that is again along a continuum. So translation is more like, you know, keeping the two languages separate, but then mentally we are drawing on those resources, otherwise we would never have been able to come up with that output, isn't it? So translanguaging, what we do is we demarcate it from other forms of multilingual communication in terms of what happens in the pedagogical context. Now we could also probably look at it in terms of professional context, but right now, I mean, I don't have access to those kinds of research, but who knows, maybe there is some work going on in that area as well. Right, but we will definitely come to subtypes of translanguaging very soon. So we can look at this, these two figures. So if we look at the second figure, it looks at the concept of using languages like a fluid medium. So it's like an abstract art that we can draw, and we really don't know, like I wouldn't be able to answer that at what point am I drawing my lexical resources, my phonological resources, my pragmatic resources. So they are all enmeshed. So it's like a fluid medium, and we can draw from there, versus the first figure, which envisages the concept of multilingual education, where different languages are present, but they are present in a monolingual manner. So we are not really looking for the mixing of the languages or the fluid presence of the languages. So that is where the concept of translanguaging differs from what we have been practicing in multilingual education for almost 100 years now. Right. So this figure gives us that kind of a imagery, and I thought it's best to kind of understand that, like I use the prism imagery, that this imagery really, it strikes a chord in our mind, right, that what are we doing with our mental resources. Yes. Let us move on to the next slide. So now we have this slide on types and purposes of translanguaging. So as Dheer was mentioning that, thank you so much, as Dheer was mentioning that there is research on different kinds of translanguaging, but primarily we could summarize it into two ways. One is spontaneous translanguaging, where the teachers might not have a very particular goal, or many a times they are not even trained to do translanguaging in a very systematic manner. They go by their intuition, they go by their teacher's sense of plausibility, like N.S. Prabhu has told us that we should look at the concept of teaching as a teacher's sense of plausibility. So what is plausible, what would achieve good outcome. So for that matter, teachers do resort to using translanguaging in a very spontaneous manner, and it reflects the real life communication picture in a very realistic manner. So therefore, there are lots of benefits of spontaneous translanguaging as well. Translanguaging would be,
whether planned or not.
It is not very much useful to compartmentalize these concepts, that they are in a continuum. Because if we look at the theoretical aspect of languages as a fluid medium, then on the other hand, if we try to segregate them, then it becomes a little problematic, So what we can do is that we understand the classroom situation versus the outside classroom situation. So classroom situation, whatever languages we are using, and it has a pedagogical purpose, so that can be understood as translanguaging. But also in the classroom context, there could be also a lot of code switching. So if the teacher is, talking to them about some narrations or some anecdotes, and generally having a social discussion with them, or planning for some other activity which is not a part of their probably syllabus, we could look at it as code switching as well. So these are porous boundaries, they are not compartmentalized. But
to say that code switching is more like a user driven behavior that they are doing, that they are actually exhibiting, just using their languages, whatever they know, whereas translanguaging is more like something that is driven by the facilitator. So there has to be a facilitator who is allowing it, or who is...
Again, I would say it is bit of both, because when we look at spontaneous translanguaging and the instances that we have seen in classes, it is not like every time the teacher has planned to do that. So they use it according to the needs of the learners. Maybe, as I said, that, and it would be nice if you could write down your questions, otherwise my flow of thought will be interrupted. And then maybe I'll take a break after the first bit, and then we can go to the next bit. Right. So many a times, as I said, that teachers are not trained to do this kind of a systematic presentation in classes, and B, they do it according to the needs of the learners, that they take decisions, but many a times they just break into dialogues with children which have all the language resources utilized. So that could be seen both as examples of code switching as well as spontaneous translanguaging. And as I said, that when we look at spontaneous translanguaging behavior, it mirrors the outside class behavior in a very, very close manner. So that is the beauty of spontaneous translanguaging, and it has a lot of scope, it has a lot of promise, and teachers can go to the next higher level where she or he can systematically plan for it and get more benefits out of it. So pedagogical translanguaging is not something like in the behaviorist paradigm, it's very structured and one has to follow this. It is a philosophy that, okay, I will be consciously using multilingual resources to the maximum benefits of myself as well as my learners, and I would look at the growth of multiple languages as proficiency and comprehension, instead of proficiency in English, proficiency in Telugu, proficiency in Hindi, proficiency in Bengali, so on and so forth. So that is the philosophy, and it takes quite a while to get used to this philosophy that I am not only using multiple language resources, but I am also looking at the outcome as multiple. I am not looking at it as unitary. Then the purpose of translanguaging would be lost, because again we are trying to compartmentalize it, we are trying to draw boundaries, so on and so forth. Right. So research shows that there are advantages of both kinds of translanguaging, but what I have felt as a researcher, that usually all teachers are knowledgeable enough that they use their teacher's sense of plausibility to practice spontaneous translanguaging. It is where they need help is this transition from spontaneous to pedagogical translanguaging, where it becomes a little more systematic, where we help them draw lesson plans and we help them take conscious decision that how they are going to present the input, how they are going to accept the output, so on and so forth. And many a times what happens is, most of it I would say is for the classroom purposes, that administratively if we have to take it to the governments and ask them to do it at the level of assessment, summative assessment for example, I don't think we will get that kind of a go ahead so soon. But all of it that we are discussing is for classroom purposes, because if we have to provide our children with a strong foundation of literacy, we have to go that extra mile. So this is that extra mile, that in the classroom we have this kind of a communicative context, and what it does, it reflects the multilingual speakers. So there is a body of theorization which say that when we live in multilingual societies can be of two types. One, if we consider US as a multilingual society where there is a dominant language and the other languages are given some kind of acceptance. So the speaker hearer at every point will not be using multilingual resources. Maybe in their neighborhoods they would, but not in a dominant condition in the classroom context, in the university context, so on and so forth. Versus in an Indian context where the society is multilingual, multicultural, and we do not have those binaries in our minds that when we converse with each other, we spontaneously use languages. And this is prototypical of a multilingual society which practices multilingualism, on an everyday basis. So when there is a push from the multilingual society to use multiple languages on an everyday basis, chances are that will get reflected automatically in the classroom context. We suddenly cannot come into the classroom and say, no, I will behave in a monolingual manner, or I will be a monolingual speaker of 3 languages. So that doesn't happen, and this is what we are currently witnessing, and we are acknowledging and appreciating that. Right. So that is the theorization behind teachers or students breaking into code switching or spontaneous translanguaging in the classroom context. Right. Now let's move on to the second bit where we look at the concept of reading development. And so if we look at this diagram, the funnel has some components. So we look at the components as what is essential for us to track in terms of reading development. So reading for comprehension is the basis of academic learning. So by which we mean that when we teach a child to comprehend in the language classroom, it does not only get restricted to that context. It goes to all other subjects. So be it word problems in mathematics, be it geography class, be it history class. So everywhere this process is present, and the benefits they draw from developing comprehension skills, they can utilize those benefits across the school or college curriculum, right? So it forms the basis of academic learning alongside mathematics and written skills, which are outside the purview of this discussion, so I'm not bringing them in. Right. So, when we look at the purpose of reading, so if we were to plan, translanguaging reading classes, we would have to zero in on the purposes of reading. So, the purposes of reading that we would have to look at would be the thematic choice that we would make, then what would be their primary, goal, would it be for academic reasons, for, reading for leisure, etc. Then what kind of texts would they be able to handle. So, if they are let us say in grades 2 and 3, we would not be using expository text, we would rather be using narrative texts and poems and things like that. So, text types, theme, level of linguistic difficulty, etc., the newness of the content are very, very important factors in text selection, because text selection is the crux of reading development class, right. So, once we are able to come up with a good text or a good unit, then chances are we would be able to teach it successfully, right. So, text selection plays a major role. However, in our projects we did not really get to teach the teachers to select text. What we did was we worked with the government textbooks. Then we have to look at the third important factor is the lexical density of the text. So, there are ways in which we can do this. I can talk about it later, but research shows that vocabulary knowledge is a very, very important determinant of reading success, and the more number of unknown words a child faces, it increases the chance of reading failure. So, research by Bhatia Lofer that I have referred to here. So, we have a formula. It says that if 92 to 95% of the words are known, then it can give rise to successful literal comprehension, not even inferential comprehension. So, our research from Landli Leela has shown that our children, we work with grades 4 and 5, that they have access to 87% of the words in the textbooks that they are supposed to read. So, of course, the reading gap is not because of their cognitive skills being not yet that developed, but it is because of the text reason. So, text becomes a cause of difficulty, which many a times we forget, and we think that it is a comprehension difficulty that children are facing. So, that is a very important factor, and we tried to address that in our project. I will talk about it. And then of course, we have to look at word decoding, vocabulary enhancement and inference making skills. So, we wanted to support these skills in order to help the learners navigate through higher level comprehension skills. So, if we look at the funnel, we have text decoding. So, text decoding we really did not worry, because we were working with grade 4, grade 5 learners, and more or less they had, I would say, 85 to 90% knowledge of word decoding. So, we did not worry too much about that in the project. We focused a lot on vocabulary knowledge and the act of drawing inferential skills. Now, research also shows that syntactic awareness or grammatical awareness, where children are able to identify ungrammatical sentences from grammatical ones, is a very important skill that helps in reading comprehension. But in this project, we were not able to explore that much. But I thought since all of us work in literacy, it would be nice for you to know that okay, you could have tasks around syntactic awareness that could build on their reading comprehension skills. Right, now let us look at some key, next slide, key aspects of reading development in a multilingual. So, the one which I showed is from research in L1 context, or English as a first language, or native speaking children of English. Now, let us look at the key aspects of reading development in a multilingual society, and the research insights that we have are again from two domains. One is cognition and multilingualism, and the second is multilingual education. There are things, as I said, that in a multilingual classroom we have to take cognizance of the fact that where is it located. So, if it is located in a country like US or Australia, we would know that the outside context is largely monolingual. So, there is a pressure of being monolingual. But in a context like Sri Lanka or India or Malaysia or any other Asian or African countries, the outside world has a huge push for multilingual communication. So, that gets easily translated into the classroom context, and many a times we resist that, instead of understanding that it is the outside class context which we have like knowingly or unknowingly brought into the classroom context. So we have to first take cognizance of that if that behavior is normalized outside, why should we look at that behavior as abnormal in the classroom context? So that is a very important aspect to give our children social justice and also enable them in comprehension and other cognitive skills through the multilingual modality. So that is a very, very primary understanding on the basis of which we could have some pedagogical planning. And cognition research on multilingualism definitely shows across the world that reading comprehension is not a monolingual event, that when we engage in a reading event, that multiple resources in our language in our minds are activated, and it is irrespective of our language proficiency. So if I were to read a research text or an experimental text, I cannot say with guarantee that none of the words in my mind that gets activated are in Hindi or Bengali or any other language that I know. So that is the evidence that reading comprehension cognitively is not a monolingual event. So if we can capitalize on this, then we would be able to plan our classes in such a manner that we exploit this argument. So learners have been found to use their L1 to comprehend texts in L2, and that's a perfectly normal behavior. And when do they do that? When they are they come across a situation where the text content becomes difficult for them to tackle. So they immediately resort to their L1 resources, and sometimes because they have their comprehension skills are yet not fully developed in L2. So there could be both reasons: content difficulty as well as developing skills, cognitive skills in comprehension itself. So even advanced learners have been found to use this, and I just gave you an example of myself, that irrespective of my proficiency level in the target language, I can resort to using other multilingual resources because I have access to them. It is as simple as that. So definitely learners L1 is not a hindrance. That is a monolingual bias of a monolingual society which practices multilingualism maybe for educational purposes, but it is a huge cognitive resource to develop L2 reading skills. Then after, when we look at comprehension skills, that comprehension skills do not get, they don't stop with just the process of comprehension. So after comprehension, we go on to production, right? So we could have production as speech, speaking activities. We could have summary writing skills. We could have, writing answers to short questions, long answers, etc., etc. So what we do is we move from comprehension into spoken production skills, either in the spoken modality or in the written modality. So there again, learners have been found that they are more successful in their production activity if they are allowed to use their multilingual resources. So what they do is they do the production and they plan the production in multiple languages, and the teacher can gradually lead them into, so if my goal is for my learners to develop written proficiency in L2, then they can do it through the route of L1. So we don't need to necessarily cut down on the route of L1. We have to be patient, that it cannot happen overnight, it will happen over a period of time, and gradually we can set goals that okay, we can look at at the lexical level, then we can look at the word level, phrase level, and then maybe at the level of sentences we could look at it at the level of paragraphs. So we could look at alternation of languages at different levels, right? And therefore, in such a context, the concept of translanguaging pedagogy, or as I mentioned before, the planned translanguaging, can be used as a suitable mechanism to help develop reading comprehension and their attendant critical thinking skills in the multilingual children in India, as well as provide them with social justice, that we we build a higher level of self-esteem, that okay, I am in a position to use multiple resources that I have and I need not feel guilty. And this goes for the teachers as well, that we are using it as a as a kind of a multiple resources that we have, and it is only logical that we would be using those resources, that nobody can stop us from using them, right? We could take a short break, and if there are pressing questions, then we can look at that, and then we can move on, or maybe some of the questions you had in your mind have been kind of answered. Right.
So one of the questions I had was then what, the implications of this, if we are normalizing this multilingualism in the classroom, what are the implications
for the materials that we create for children. You know, how do you kind of do that?
I'll come to that. There are some examples that I have. See, one of the things that I wanted to raise in this discussion, and it is a bit provocative, but I think we are all grappling with that it is already normalized. You know, you walk into a classroom, irrespective of whether it's a primary level classroom or secondary or even at tertiary level, that where English is not the dominant language of the society, it is not a parental language, it is not used for home communication, then for negotiation and meaning making, we would be using other languages for the target language to be developed, right? So once we understand that, as a teaching practice, we can easily inculcate that in our classes, but to bring it to the level of administrative decisions is something that takes a while. But at the level of creating materials, it is not too problematic, because problematic not for the multilingual use, I didn't mean that. What I meant was, it is, so when we create materials are written behavior, right? So what we can do is we can think of creating inputs and planning outputs in an alternation manner of the two languages. So instead of creating monolingual textbooks, we have bi or trilingual textbooks where we use languages as required according to the level of the student. So let's say if it is in grades 3 to 4, we could systematically have all the instructions in 2 or 3 languages, and then we have the text in one language, but if required we could also have a bilingual text. Why not? And then what we do in class at the communicative level is for the teachers and the learners. So one is creation of the materials at the written level, and the second is transacting that material in the class at a communicative level. So all of this, these are several decisions. Some of it, if it is like a public document, we could take some decisions, but certain decisions when it comes to the classroom transactions, there we cannot be too tight about it. So that depends on how well the teacher is able to manage her linguistic resources. That also is very important for the translingual thing to be successful, because not every teacher would have proficiency in every language equally well.
So when you say bilingual or trilingual books, you're saying 3 different languages, like written, like say when you buy a camera, you find instructions in 10 different languages, and you almost kind of navigate through all of those to try and see the language that's most comfortable for me to read and understand.
Or maybe to notice.
So then we are saying that for the child also to navigate through these various texts, which could be different scripts also, to then decide, okay, which is the language that I feel would be.
I mean, it won't be as loose as that, but it would be at least, a good starting point would be at least 2 or 3 languages. So English and maybe one more language and an additional language. So which we cannot cater to. So when we look at it as a written behavior in terms of using lesson plans or creating materials, we cannot be doing it in 10 languages, but depending on the needs of the learners, if we show to the teachers, okay, this is something that can be done, the teacher can do some supplementary work and can bring in those languages. So like in Telangana, what we have done is we have created lesson plans for the teachers which are in 3 languages. So English, Hindi and Telugu, and that has catered to maximum number of learners, because they are either from the Muslim population, so they have Urdu at home, but then they are also able to understand Hindi. Then there are the migrant population who have several home languages, but most of the times they are able to either understand a variant of Telugu or Hindi. So it has worked. So that way we can economize on the number of languages we use, but then if we want to make it too fluid and we want to include many more languages, that is a difficulty that we would not be able to tackle at this level, but it is a good starting point. Even that is a lot of cognitive work.
There's a slight difference in terms of, in our context, English is not the medium.
Yes.
So therefore what happens is that and the teacher often doesn't know the child's L1, let's say. In those cases, it's not considered too abnormal for the teacher to use, let's say, Hindi, which is the medium of instruction. Right? So it's slightly different from English, where per force, because the teacher knows that no one's going to understand much English, they use a lot of the whatever the other languages they are with. But when it's Hindi, let's say, and it's, let's say, a tribal situation or anywhere else, and the teacher knows or doesn't know, in both cases, there isn't enough pressure to be using those languages.
Okay.
That's an issue.
But then the pressure, the pressure, as I said, that you also mentioned this, that what would be the pedagogical need to use the languages, one, and the outside classroom multilingual support. So that gets translated in the classroom context, right? So many a times I have heard, teachers or researchers asking that, okay, if one variant, usually it's the standard variety which is used in the educational context, but if there are other varieties, or if there are, migrant population who are from a border area, that they use a mix of both the state languages, then in that case, how do we bring in those languages? Because those might not have a written counterpart. So what we say is a simple way of, using, a simple way of navigating through that complexity would be use, like, let's say, the Hindi language, but then like we do in WhatsApp, that we want to, I would like to speak in Bengali, but I use the Roman script. So that way, the teachers can, help the learners access something that they have readily available at the home environment. Because most of the times, the children we are talking about do not have literacy access at home, isn't it? So literacy practices are not very frequent at home, but then home languages are always there, right? They permeate. So that environment, if we can create in class by using the Hindi script.
But let's also imagine like two languages which are there in the classroom but which are not linguistically closer to each other. For example, like a Ho and a Hindi.
Absolutely.
So what happens there is like there's not only an oral transfer that needs to be understood and facilitated. There is a script to script transfer that also needs to be facilitated. So I mean, my little understanding and experience has been that script to script transfer takes time.
Script to script transfer takes time, but then there is also research which shows, and this is something that we have all experienced during our childhood days, that we could break into reading because we had oral exposure in the language. So irrespective of whatever medium we have studied in. Right? So oral comprehension and oral vocabulary has a huge impact on reading development. So when I am making other languages which are X1, X2, X3 available to my learners, which may not be the target language of instruction, they can use their knowledge, their oral knowledge of those languages to break into the script, which can be Devanagari or Roman, but essentially the language is X1, X2, X3, right? In order to understand why.
So if there is many languages in one script, but what about many languages in two scripts?
Yes, that's the example I gave, right? Like we have done English, Telugu and Hindi, 3 distinct scripts, but we also have English glossing because we found that they are more, so Telugu children, for example, those who come from a Telugu dominant background, that they have more ease at reading Telugu which is presented in Roman script, very surprisingly, rather than the Telugu script. But the moment we provided them with the Telugu script in Roman language, they were able to make sense of the English content. We can do the graduation over a period of time. There is no need to take away that and always envisage that okay, it would be finally for a monolingual, because apart from writing, we actually never perform in a monolingual manner. So irrespective of whatever the communicative situation is, as adults, if we can use multilingual resources, then in the classroom for knowledge comprehension and understanding, why shouldn't we use those resources? And these are pedagogical moves. As I said at the beginning, that I'm not suggesting that this can be done at the administrative level, you know, like the final exam, for example. So there we have to, for purposes of maybe the child's learning as well as a host of other purposes which are beyond our control, that we have to keep it monolingual. But then till the point the child reaches that, providing this kind of a support. And anyway, at home, I'm sure many of us have kids at home, right? So when we interact with them and when we try to teach them things from a unit, most of the times don't we slip into our L1s, and that is so seamlessly done. So why can't the teachers and the children in class do that, right?
No, I agree with translanguaging and
Yeah,
pedagogy.
yeah.
Definitely would like to see the results also.
Yeah.
Plus any longitudinal study.
We are doing that, yeah. That is the reason why we are, you know, trying to connect with more people who are into research on literacy and get funding and do this kind of, and maybe some of the ideas that you pick up you could use in your pockets and see. So it is all in a phase of transition. And at the level of research, we have a lot of evidence, but then in terms of, educational evidence, classroom observation-based evidence, we have still a long way to go.
Right. So are we saying that we will not be able to plan a translanguaging pedagogical exercise in writing?
Of course, yes. We can. See, one is the communication. Yeah, so that's what I will show very soon towards the end of my discussion. So one is, see, there are two complexities. One is the writing behavior and another is the oral communication. I think you had a question, right? Yeah.
Still, how much time we should give to the children who are just studying in grade 1 and in the translanguaging approach? 2 or 3 years that the child is able to at least execute the skill reading.
Translanguaging as a pedagogy exists till the university level, wherever required, because it's a pedagogical move. It is not the learning outcome. I think that's where many of us are getting confused, that we are using a pedagogical move and then towards a learning. So learning outcome can be monolingual, you know, if required, but then to support that we are using translanguaging pedagogy. Like I gave you the best example of parental, discussion with the kids. I'm sure that strikes a chord in your mind, that how we discuss with them, how we negotiate, and how they are able to give us examples or evidence that they have understood and they can perform in the test. So we are not worried that because of this discussion, they won't be able to, perform in a written test, isn't it? So it's the same philosophy. Yeah.
So would you suggest that translanguaging pedagogy should be a temporary arrangement?
No.
Let's say until children have, so let's assume they are proficient in their native language and then they have achieved reasonable proficiency in whatever the second language is, whether it's English or, because like you mentioned, one scenario is exams and also in higher grades and in STEM subjects, sometimes resources like these presenting information in 3 languages is not possible, 2 or more languages is not possible. So do we say that these are our goals of using the 2 languages simultaneously, and once we see those goals being achieved, we then bifurcate, one in the interest of developing literacy, which may be a little more difficult because in the written context languages would have unique features, and also children then can better absorb the features of each language.
See, one of the things we need to take cognizance of is that one is developing proficiency in a language, another is developing comprehension skills and maybe production skills, which could be speaking and writing. Yes. So when we think of developing comprehension skills, then at any point of time we can resort to translanguaging, right, or we can use translanguaging. When we look at the development of proficiency and proficiency as an outcome, so outcome meaning, okay, this would be the written proficiency, this would be the vocabulary knowledge, syntactic knowledge, or speaking proficiency, then we can look at the behavior in a more watertight compartment. But translanguaging as a pedagogical move, it is very difficult to say when we take it away.
For example, science subjects in high school, teacher would definitely want to explain in a language that's familiar to children.
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, the need never goes away.
Never goes away. All colleges, I mean, I have had this workshop, several workshops with government teachers, Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, and they all say hands down that all our classroom communication is in Telugu, without which no communication will happen. But then they are navigating through an English textbook, and the learners are also preparing for, so it is not that, so see, when we are able to translate and code switch, it does not mean that we are not developing proficiency in those languages. So we are not looking at language proficiency as an enmeshed thing. So the language knowledge is a mental repertoire, but when it comes out as production, then depending on the speech community, we can perform in a monolingual manner or in a multilingual manner. So that is our advantage over monolinguals. So the child would, over a period of time, would also be trained on exam behavior. There is no need to worry that because of translanguaging inputs, that behavior will not get formed. It will, irrespective of our inputs, the child would have to get exam ready, isn't it?
So that is assuming that they have developed proficiency and also the understanding to, if they're able to understand when do I move from or what language resource should I
and as the proficiency in both the languages develop, so see, as time progresses, the child will also be able to develop proficiency in each language, by which the child would be able to perform in a monolingual manner as well.
Whenever needed.
Whenever needed. But this we are talking about, a more basic skill, which is comprehension and meaning making. So that gets affected if we wish to, work in a monolingual, with a monolingual attitude or behavior. So this presentation is more for, addressing the comprehension needs and the meaning making needs of the children over looking at it as a proficiency, mechanism. That will eventually develop.
Thank you.
That would also mean, therefore, resetting our expectations in terms of what children should be able to do, all these learning outcomes and everything that we are setting here at a national level. I think this then also has an implication on our are we expecting something else from children, because our expectations are from a monolingual perspective and not from a multilingual perspective.
I don't think administratively we can rock the bottom too much, but in the process that we have so many dropouts, that would probably be addressed, because they are so if they are not able to make meaning out of a text that they are reading, then they would never be able to go at higher level of inferencing and text integration and all of that. So this is to primarily address that, and this is not only to do, this has got nothing to do with age. It can be practiced at college, and there are loads of research evidence to show that what happens. So what research does is, in an experimental setup, they use the translanguaging mechanism, and then they look at writing behavior or speaking behavior and look at the impact of that on the learning outcomes.
Just not exactly the question, but I want to know your opinion or some references on that. One type of translanguaging, as you mentioned, is spontaneous translanguaging, and then pedagogical translanguaging. When it comes to pedagogical translanguaging in the classroom, automatically in the system, as we have been doing or government is doing, it comes to the assessment. Which pedagogical practice is more useful to get the target language learned, as we are having the objective. So, as you many times says that this is only about the pedagogical moves, and just it should be open. But when we talk moving from spontaneous to pedagogical, assessment will automatically come.
Absolutely.
So, do you have some kind of
we have translanguaging assessment as well. So I'm going to talk about that at the end. So I think we can now skip a few slides which are self-explanatory. Let us go to slide number 13. And they were our control group to see whether the impact of translanguaging pedagogy had any role in the reading development of the children. So we will quickly look at the methodology of the projects and then some preliminary findings. So we could go to the next slide. Yeah, so here we have the two projects. So one is the British Academy project, which was the reading development project. So what we did was, at the beginning of the project, we had a battery of baseline tests in order to ascertain their general proficiency levels through vocabulary and grammar, then their reading skills and general cognitive ability. And I'll show you the list of tests in the next slide. And so what we did was, we examined them at the beginning, and then during the intervention also we tried to map their growth in reading while using the translanguaging pedagogy. So that was during intervention, and then post intervention. So post intervention impact, we have just collected data, we are yet to analyze that. So I'd be able to share some reflections from the baseline performance of the students, and then at the second stage during the intervention. So the participants were 150 from government English medium schools. So Telangana has this now this policy that all the schools have turned into EMI schools overnight. And so at the time when we met the kids, they were they had just reached grade 5, but prior to that, for 2 long years they were at home, and we really don't know what was going on. And how much access they had to education, what kind of content learning they had, etc., etc. So it was a very difficult time, and we were very much unsure how we would be using our reading tests, how they would be. So we were very nervous. But what we observed was that even though during the baseline tests they did not perform that well, but within a month or two, when we started interacting with them and the teachers brought in this planned kind of translanguaging in the classroom, there was quite a bit of change, and many of the learners had kind of built on their comprehension skills, and they could go back to what they knew before the pandemic time. So that was very heartening for us to observe. And then of course we went on along with the translanguaging pedagogy and looking at their reading tasks and their performance, and we supported them in class along with the teachers. We did a lot of peer group activities with them. Then when we reached at the post intervention stage, we were not as nervous as in the beginning, that at the beginning we thought nothing would make sense to them. So the 150 participants, they were offset by this control group from 70, kind of roughly 70 to 80 learners from private low cost English medium schools in the same neighborhood. And from the training project of the British Council, what we did was, we had a series of workshops where we met the teachers, and as you can well imagine that this is a very complex thing to deal with, in terms of their philosophy of learning and trying to inculcate something in a very rigorous manner. So as I said, that spontaneous translanguaging, I think more or less is present across schools in India at different levels, that many a times teachers do it consciously, they do it according to whatever comes to their mind at that point of time, so on and so forth. So to build on that and to make it into a planned program was where it was kind of going to be very difficult. So we started off with a series of workshops, and then we had developed simple things like asking them over phone and doing Google Meet sessions with them, because most of the times they were not available during school hours to meet us and give us interviews or sit with us about the next day's plan and all that. So many a times we also navigated through Google Meet sessions, and we asked them to make diary notes. Again, diary notes was something that they just did not want to do, because this kind of a reflective training is not a part of their school profile, or maybe in their B.Ed programs or primary education teacher training programs, they were not trained to do that. They did not have an orientation. So there was a lot of resistance. Maybe I would say 5 to 10% of the teachers participated, in diary entries, but we tried to support them with as many critical thinking activities that we could, so that they could use their cognitive resources to build on these translanguaging materials along with us. So what we did was, we trained them, and then we started off with the intervention program, and the training went on hand in hand. and towards the end what we did was we again went for the classroom observations were done in a two-tiered manner. So in tier 1 all our research associates were the ones who were directly dealing with them. And then towards the end, when we went for the last round of observations, so I was involved with them, and I went and sat in most of the classes, and we observed, we made notes, we drew on the good examples that the teachers were using, and we could also see that in the process the teachers' proficiency across languages, they seem to be more easeful. They seem to be more confident that okay, now I can use Telugu for this set of instructions. I can do the explanation of a EVS unit in Telugu or Hindi. So we saw that ease in the teachers, but they reported to us from time to time that they were finding it extremely challenging, that navigating between languages orally as well as a written document was not something that was very easy for them. Let's go to the next slide. So here we have a quick model of both the projects in unison. So what we did was we took some time to get the approval and the selection of the schools. So government took almost a year to give us the sanction. But hopefully, thankfully that was during the pandemic time, so that happened. And then we selected these 10 schools, government schools who were our experimental group, and then we called them for the workshop. 2 workshops, and then along with that we had the first round of baseline assessment from the kids, and then we started the teacher training workshops which were held in July and in January. Then the RAs, our research associates, helped them with the collaborative lesson planning as a document, and then they sat with them in the classes to see how the lesson plans were implemented. And there were 2 rounds of classroom observations which we technically transcribed, and we looked for examples. But there were many observations that the RAs did which were like a preparation and also to look at the implementation of the translanguaging pedagogy. So that is how we tried to support them. And then at the end of it, in the last months of February and March this year, we went ahead with the second round of assessment to understand what is the impact of this pedagogy. So we are yet to look at those results. Let's go to the next slide. So for this project, we used a mix of commercial and classroom based assessments. And the commercial assessments were all standardized. They were purchased from the University of Cambridge, and they are all monolingual in English. But we used them in order to understand firstly what was the baseline proficiency of the learners and the reading difficulties that they were facing. So that is the reason why we used these commercially driven tests, which became like diagnostic tests for us. However, for our Indian context, in the classroom context, we need not worry a lot about these commercially designed tests. So because they are largely monolingual, what we can do is we can take examples of the rationale of these tests and we can design parallel tests and assessments for our learners. But the greatest takeaway from these tests in the project was that we tried something on a very experimental basis. And what was that? So to answer your question now, so what we did was we, along with the commercial tests, we used 3 more tests which we designed. We took 3 units from the English textbook and 3 units from the EVS textbook, because we were looking at comprehension, and we consciously chose the language classroom and the subject classroom. So like in Multilila, we had chosen mathematics as a subject classroom. So in these 2 projects, we chose EVS, where there is more scope for reading and comprehension. The medium of instruction technically is English, but then how they function. So EVS and English. So we had both the teachers who were inducted into the translanguaging pedagogy. So one of the things which we experimentally did and which really made a lot of difference was, so as I was saying, that we created 3 reading comprehension assessments, and so in the assessments what we did was we provided the children with 3 texts which were from the 3 units of English and EVS. Of course not the entire unit, but some 150 to 200 words. The texts were presented in English. And then for the assessment, the items, so again this was driven by research, that research in multilingual assessment shows that for reading comprehension we can have two types of question types or item types. One is multiple choice items and another is short answer questions. Okay. So, short answer questions is where it is more tricky because it can give rise to inter-rater reliability because we are looking at individual responses. So, what we did was we created an assessment criteria which was, so ideally it should be graded, but what we did was, because for research reasons we also had to crunch a lot of numerical figures for statistical analysis, we scored them. But the scoring was based on a carefully designed assessment criteria. And for the MCQs, what we did was we provided them with the English text and Telugu MCQ. So, we created the MCQs in English and we translated them into Telugu or Hindi as required. And we took a conscious decision that for expository texts which are information based, children would not need that kind of an L1 support. So, we kept to short question answers in English which they were free to answer either in English or Hindi or Telugu. So, the output was according to the child's preference, because we were interested in looking at their development of comprehension and not directly proficiency, but definitely this is development of proficiency through content, right, because the child would make an attempt to access their linguistic resources while preparing the answers, isn't it? So, that is what we allowed them to do, and the multiple choice options which we provided in Telugu or Hindi, we only did that for the narrative texts, because narrative texts are more complex, because they give rise to a lot of inferencing in the reader's mind, that there has to be a lot of in between reading in order to understand the progression of the plot or the emotions of the characters, the relationship between the characters, so on and so forth. So, and so this was again research governed, that narrative texts have higher level comprehension capacities or testing points, which we captured through the through a translingual manner, that we used Telugu or Hindi MCQs which were translated from English. But for the expository texts, we mostly used short question answers which were presented to them in English. So, they made sense of it on their own and then they answered according to their choice of preference. Many a times we observed that they have mixed languages, but that was not seen to be problematic at all, because we were interested in looking at their comprehension process, right. So, this is what we did, and that is how we brought in translanguaging also as an assessment process. And although in India this is still not, this has not still come out into the mainstream, but there has been a lot of research in the South American countries, especially where Spanish is used as a second language due to reasons of colonialization, like English in India and many of the Asian countries. And there they have this concept of translanguaging assessment done in a quite a mainstream manner, and they also have commercial tests for that. So, it is not an altogether new idea, but and it is not like questions the learner's proficiency in a monolingual manner in either of the languages. So, this is quite done, and this is a good practice. Even if you were not comfortable doing it in a proficiency classroom, definitely to build on learners' comprehension skills, this can be easily done, and it can be done as long as required, right. Okay, then let us go to the next slide. So, from the baseline performance, I am just going back and forth, sorry, not making it into a very structured presentation. I hope you are okay with that. So, from the baseline tests, what we could see is these were some of the findings which you can maybe take 2 minutes to look at, and I think you would be able to, you would probably agree with most of the points, right. So, I think points 1, 2, 3, 4 are things which we quite commonly find with readers who are finding it difficult to comprehend. But the fifth point, this is something that we came across when we used the translanguaging assessment at the first level. So, in the baseline battery, we used the translanguaging assessment once, then we used it during intervention another time, and the third time we use it at the post intervention phase. So from the first time, that's the baseline assessment time, we could see that when the MCQs in the narrative text were presented in Telugu or Hindi, they could perform much better. So that gave us evidence, that learners were able to access their comprehension skills from their L1 resources, and they could express their inferential understanding through the MCQs when presented in Telugu. So which means that they have comprehended the text in English and they are able to express their comprehension using the L1 resources. So that was a very promising thing for us, and we realized that we are on the right track and we could proceed with that. Right, so then let us look at the next slide, the teacher training workshop. So teacher training workshop, we did primarily what I did in this session, so we talk to them about the concept of translanguaging, but in a more simpler manner, definitely not in this kind of a technical manner. So before the intervention, we had a series of workshops where we introduced the idea. Then we also asked them to convert some of the tasks into translanguaging inputs, which they did in smaller groups, and eventually they started collaborating with our team of RAs to create lesson plans. And so we can go to the next slide. So when we worked with them on the lesson plans, we also explained to them that how they could use the translingual pedagogies or the strategies in a more conscious manner. So they needed some kind of a training, some kind of orientation in that, and also we explained to them what was the rationale for designing such tasks, and so that they were convinced, because finally they had to be comfortable, right, to transact the knowledge in that kind of a manner. And then they participated in collaborative learning, lesson planning. But I must say that although they participated, but they were not able to reach at that stage. I think it was too early that within 6 months to create an entire lesson plan with the translanguaging input. So that is not something that they were able to do, but they could come up with ideas in bits and pieces where to fill in and how to use the resources. So for example, use a multilingual word bank or a phrase bank, for example, so that children could navigate the texts in a certain manner. So certain parts they were more successful, but certain parts they were not that comfortable. Right, and then we go to the next slide where we have during intervention. So during intervention, we constantly shared new learning resources with them. We helped them fine tune the lesson plans, and then also we gave them feedback. After most of the sessions, we tried to get them in a team, and if in school we were not able to do that, we asked them to come for some Google Meet sessions, and so that we could meet them in a larger group, and we also gave them appreciative feedback that they were on the right track, and that although they were finding it difficult, but they were still working with the kids, so on and so forth. And alongside that, our RAs did a wonderful job in documenting their feedback and teacher experience of using TLP in the classroom context. Then let's go to the next slide. So we had a series of classroom observations, as I said, but only 2 of them which we will finally look for impact. So what we did was the classroom observations, we used the collaborative lesson plans, and they were used to track the reading strategy implementation in class, note the learners' responses or change in behavior, and support the teachers during the lessons. And then post observation, we provided them with context specific feedback. Okay, so so this is a summary slide. Why were the translanguaging strategies helpful for the teachers? So this was like for 2 main reasons. One, to support reading across languages. So we did not compartmentalize reading in L2, but we looked at development of comprehension across L1 and L2. So we heavily dependent on the learner's background knowledge, both in terms of their thematic knowledge as well as linguistic knowledge. And we used a lot of Q questions, a lot of translingual questions as a scaffold to develop comprehension, and then we consolidated comprehension by helping them explain parts of the text to themselves. So it was not like, so it was less of teacher led class, rather than it was more of that we consciously wanted them to solve the texts on their own during the peer meet activities. Doesn't matter even if they were not able to get the meaning at the first go. So silently the research associates, they went around and they found out what was happening in those peer meet sessions and how they were looking at meaning, negotiation, comprehension, so on and so forth. So for example, the teacher would start off with the unit, do some activities and do some thematic mapping, and then maybe she would do one paragraph, and then next 2 paragraphs she would ask the students to discuss amongst themselves, and then she would ask some Q questions to check on their comprehension. So that's how we negotiated the meaning making. So translanguaging inputs were inculcated both in the teacher as well as in the learner. So we tried to do all of that in the class. And the second part, we, as a result of doing this, we also consciously wanted the learners to develop their vocabulary. So we looked at both their lexical breadth, meaning the number of new words that they know, and lexical depth, meaning the number of uses of each word. So different meanings, morphological operations, then uses of different part of speech of the same word. So we wanted like a vocabulary flood experience in the class. So because vocabulary is the most important precursor of reading comprehension development. So we wanted to support that. And as a result of this, what we realized is that, so now I'm quickly summing up on the teacher training project, that what we realized is that the TLP methodology was really served as a scaffold to the teachers. It had its advantages, and when we supported teachers to adopt reflective practices, we found some we found that they were not that easeful in doing that. So we realized that we need more training to develop teachers' reflective practices on the use of translanguaging pedagogy, because right now we are looking at the pedagogical moves as something which has to be performed, but what the teachers are going through, what kind of meaning making is happening in their minds, there is no way to track that yet. So that is something that we need to go as a next level, which we plan to do later. And then of course guiding them through task design and reading assessment, helping them implement TLP reading model in a more relevant manner. And then we can go to the next slide, which might look a little complex, but then this is the process we as a team followed to develop the lesson plan inputs for the teachers. So what we did was, we looked at, as I said, that we did not go into the concept of text selection. We took texts from the textbook units. Then what we did was, we did a lexical analysis of the units through a software to identify which words and phrases are at the highest difficulty level. So research shows that there are these different levels of words according to their frequency, the Oxford word list. So there are words K1 and K2 level, which are the most frequently occurring words in a language, and research says that for primary level reading success, learners need to know 80% of K1 to K2 level words. So what we did was, through the software we analyzed the words and phrases which were K2 and beyond, and those we knew would be our target vocabulary for teaching, for enhancement. So that is one task that we did, and then of course we spent a lot of time creating the translingual inputs, the instructions, the tasks, etc. And again for the comprehension bit, we consciously looked at framing questions that would look at factual comprehension versus inferential comprehension, and we, at the very end of each unit, we had something called a bilingual summary. So that would look at the ability of a reader to retain the entire text in the mind based on whatever links he or she draws between the idea units. Okay, and that can be best captured through a summary writing or a summary telling behavior. So this is what we attempted, but of course not for every individual kid, but we did it in pockets as a group activity. So that is what was at the end of our every unit. So that is what, so this is what the diagram, I think you have got now copies, you can look at that and you can ask me if you have any questions. The next slide is what I just discussed, so we can ignore that. And we can come to the next slide. Yeah, this one. So this is something that we realized, that we have to provide the translanguaging inputs and the support in a more teacher oriented manner according to the needs of the teacher. So it's not like we can say that, okay, these are certain things which we can prescribe for every pocket of teachers. So depending on their local needs and the local number of local languages that one has to navigate, like you said, that in your context it is primarily Hindi is the medium of instruction, and they might have to navigate through other languages. So we were working with the Telangana government schools where we looked at the EMI context, but then as I said, that depending on the local needs, we would need to devise such inputs, such methodological plans which would best be suitable for the teacher's existing level of proficiency and the extent that he or she could help the learners. And of course, they need more time and practice to get familiar with the approach. This is just the tip of the iceberg. And they also, in the process, what we realized is we can help them develop pedagogic content knowledge. So we could, also get them to read something on translanguaging, which was one of my research scholars. She's not a part of the team, but she's a very bright scholar. So what she did was, many of the theoretical texts on translanguaging, she simplified them and rewrote them in Telugu, and that we distributed to the teachers. So we get them a little bit of because without reading in the area, one can never get this kind of kind of a confidence that, okay, what I am doing is theoretically governed. So we attempted doing that, but again at a very small scale. We need to do more of that. And our next step is going more systematic with the multilingual reading assessment, which we are currently in the process of. So that's what the next two projects are going to be about, and we will start one this year in July, and the second one we will have from 2024 January to December. So multilingual assessment, multilingual reading assessment, and then we could have as an application we could have multilingual speaking or writing assessment. So that is where we are heading now. And then we have the references, and these are some of the snippets from the intervention classes that our RAs have collected. And then the next slide, we have our team of twin projects. So we have these RAs, 4 of them are from India, and Anusha and Marguerite, they are from Cambridge. So they provided us with all the English support, getting us the commercial version of the tests, and also doing some numerical analysis and things like that. And then the next slide. So Vrishali and Sankriti they work very closely with me in developing the collaborative lesson plans.
Like, if I have to take it for myself, can we say that the translanguaging pedagogy are basically schema activation processes before you are making meaning of a given content, and now it is up to me whether I decide the output generation in a monolingual format or a bilingual format, which we have not yet decided at a policy level. We mostly look at a monolingual output. But if tomorrow if I go to a teacher training, or if I am developing a textbook, incorporating ways to help the teacher expand the schema or thinking through multilingual resources, that is what we would basically take away from what we are calling translanguaging, right?
Schema is the beginning point, and then all along through the unit as well. So schema would be activating what is available in the long-term memory as the background knowledge, and constant alignment of that with the current text that I am interacting with.
And the focus that you have done in this particular study is more through the words, that is the vocabulary development.
No, in the UK, mostly in the UK, and they are not for formative purposes. They are to look at the learning as a product. Okay, so they are commercially driven, they are for a monolingual crowd. The benchmark or the yardstick of performance, like the percentile of performance, is all in terms of monolingual behavior, right? And that is very wrong to compare it with the multilingual behavior, because multilinguals have, as I showed at the beginning of my presentation, that they have the prism, and we are comparing the prism with a pair of specs, right? So it is ethically unfair to compare monolingual behavior or monolingual performance with multilingual performance, assuming that the multilingual performance is monolingual performance in 2 or 3 languages, right? And the second thing is, these commercially driven tests were not pitched at the level of our children. They were not culturally, suitable. They were more like let us take an example from the COVID times. That we had different vaccines, and at one point you must have noticed that the UK and US and other rich countries from the global north were very nervous about allowing Indians to enter their countries who came with a Covishield, right? So they were worried about it because it was not context sensitive, isn't it? They had those kinds of things. So the same thing applies to our context also, that tests which are developed for the global north, why should we accept them for global south? So because so we took them as just a baseline performance, but the one which was most interesting for us was the formative assessment which we used with them in the translingual manner, and that gave us clear indication that they have inferential comprehension skills which we are unable to tap, and we say that they are inferior and they have deficits and things like that. See, word decoding and comprehension are 2 different things altogether. Word decoding has to be done on a case by case basis, and they have to develop it. There is no bilingual or trilingual. So in every language, word decoding has to be learnt. It is a learnt behavior, but comprehension is a mental behavior. So that may or may not need adult intervention. So that it need not need adult intervention, we train the students, those who are in need of that and reside in a multilingual community like ours, that you use your mental resources to navigate through the comprehension on your own.
So the question that was framed in the MCQ, question was framed in Telugu?
Yes. We translated, I mean I am not a Telugu.
That to Telugu, the question was translated in Telugu, but and the options were given in English.
No.
They were also in Telugu.
But we can do that as well. So those are the ones which we will experiment in our next.
So next, when you said that now multilingual reading assessment is where you will be experimenting with different kind of.
And that is also based on research. So I am currently doing a paper for this. They are not exactly publisher, but then they do journals as well as books. It's called Multilingual Matters. So I am doing a chapter for them in a particular book on translanguaging for classroom purposes. So where I am looking at assessment of multilingual learners, reading assessment, and there is a lot of research on the choice of questions of a test or an assessment. So what should be the language of the questions? Should it be L1, should it be L2, should it be a mix of both? So there is a lot of research on that as well, which is grounded in multilingual assessment research in the multilingual education.
Sure. Just another question, when you said that spontaneous translanguaging is something which I think particularly in government schools is very, very common. In private schools, of course, we go with that most of the time monolingual lens.
I think monolingual classes are, see, in India it's a very complex situation. So when we look at the concept of immersion program, that we have only the target language and all subjects in the target language, so that's the EMI context, right? So in certain cases it is successful, and it is successful only when it is a language of the home environment, and parental literacy plays a huge role in helping those kids, like all our parents have done, navigating through those texts and attending to the comprehension skills and developing proficiency as a result of it. But in cases where children do not have A, literacy practices at home, and B, that the language of instruction is not one of the home languages, then it goes against social justice, that we expect them to perform in that language as the medium of instruction.
So my question is that when spontaneous translanguaging is very much part of every teacher in the government school,
it is
what
not
were the
normalized.
challenges in this particular translanguaging pedagogy that you were trying to do? You said that
when we started off with the first workshop, they said ये तो हम सब करते हैं, ये तो नहीं है ज़रूरत है. But when we took them through the units, you know, and how it could be broken down, like you said, cognitively activating the schemata and developing, you know, things like multilingual dictionary or multilingual word bank, and then use those combination of words and phrases to develop test items. Then frame the reading questions in different languages and make a conscious decision that which question in which language. So then they found it to be you know, very rigorous. Yeah.
There only you said that they got caught to the idea of
Yeah.
vocabulary ko to kar lo,
हाँ.
dictionary bana do
हाँ.
with this language.
Yeah, yeah.
But the moment it came to questions kaise frame karne hain,
And
how
also
in
to
which language.
rewrite the instructions, to use those instructions in class.
Right.
In a very, you know, so our basic point of using the instructions was to draw the learner's attention towards comprehension and not teach them by reading aloud the text. So those things they found cognitively, and it is I mean, even our researchers found it too difficult at the beginning, you know. So because we had researchers who had equal competence in the other languages, Telugu and Hindi, that they were able to do it, but they had to consult their language dictionaries, and they had to spend a lot of time just framing the instructions, then making it less academic, and it was somewhere midway between informal and formal, because with kids we cannot be using very bookish language, right? So then the idea would be lost.
Oh, right. It would be lovely if you can share some of the
Sure.
material.
Sure, sure. We are in the process of developing, so we have got a little bit of funding to develop some teacher material based on the 2 projects that we are now, so that's the last part of the reading project. So we are in the process of that, and definitely I would be able to, and it would be nice to also, you know, get your feedback when you use it and give us some reflections, and if there could be a mechanism of sharing you know, experiences, then it can go on. Otherwise it would be like a top down, that I'm doing this and I'm also critiquing my presentation, you know, that I'm doing it and I'm leaving it at that.
Right. So what we would like to do is to, you know, maybe in some of our schools where we are working, do
Yes.
in a pilot form.
Yeah.
Some of what you have done.
Yeah. Yeah. So this model.
This actually, and as what I was wanting to ask is, this is mostly, therefore children's languages are mostly used in the oral domain, right? So because it's not for reading and writing yet, not exactly. So we are actually doing that for early grades in terms of very similar.
Very similar.
Very similar.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And, one of the instruments that we've tried to use is called MAIN, which is again, this is, I think it's multilingual
assessment in
of
narratives.
instrument for narratives. Yeah. So we are doing this, and we've done it for mainly for grades 1 to 3. Where we get stuck is we don't do lesson plans because I don't know whether the lesson plan will work at this age or not. We've used mostly principles and guidance about where to use which language. Again, very purposive, but often what happens is, and I think that's a learning from your presentation, that it remains still in the realm of principles, ideas. And of course awareness and encouraging that to happen, but not specified in this lesson exactly how to do it.
Absolutely.
So that's where I think the learning is from this.
So when we put it down to writing, you know, that as teachers, I'm saying as teachers, as teacher educators, as researchers, that this is what I have to do with the text, that okay, I have this as a philosophy at the back of my mind, but how do I put it down in a more systematic manner, because my idea is to exploit the languages for maximum benefit. So many a times we do you know, word translation, but then we do not look at it as lexical depth versus breadth. So that if we can, and also word associations like synonymy, hyponymy, antonyms, then creating semantic networks. So those are things which only teachers would have the content knowledge and the creativity to do. And if he or she, as I said, that we many a times we found that the learners, you know, went beyond what the teachers were trying to do, because they got a sense of it, hang of it, and then they were just very happy that they could use their linguistic resources, and their creativity, I think, is much higher than ours.
So have you also documented some of the learners, how they have gone?
We are doing that.
Taking these tips, whatever tips were shared, and how they have taken.
Our focus was not so much on the learners, so that was like, you know, like a additional benefit that we saw, but we focused more on the teachers and tried to note down some of the examples, and which we are going to use to develop the multilingual materials.
Sure.
To close this session, is there any final questions from anyone?
Yeah, sure.
During the study, did you came through some kind of mindset issues with teachers, prejudices? Can you please share?
Initially, yes, and of course also from the 20, you know, it's not like everybody was equally forthcoming, but because we had a very bright set of RAs who made it successful, I must say that they almost met them 2 to 3 times every week, and they were working as a team. So it is a very small group, and to take it to larger numbers and to see its success would be dependent on you know, how much they are able to use their resources, and of course mindset is the first level. So that we initially you know, experienced, but then the moment we started doing it in a very structured manner with the lesson plans and all, then it started getting more detailed, and they started taking more interest, and they realized that okay, what they already do here, they are doing it in a more structured manner. So we will have a final dissemination event. This time we are doing it in Hyderabad, because our work has been in Hyderabad, but the next one we will do in Delhi. So I will definitely let you know, and all of you, where we will be coming up with the results from the multilingual assessment and also of the translanguaging pedagogy. So that will happen sometime in 2024. So we have already made a bid for that. So in the final dissemination event, we will have a half a day, you know, teacher presentation on teaching learning resources. So they call TLR. So that we are pushing them to do it in the translingual manner. So usually they do it like you know, a wheel and then some grammar activities and things like that. So now we are pushing them to A, to do it for comprehension activities, and B, to use some translingual input. So let's see how, at least of the 20, even if some 7 of them presents, it would be wonderful. So we are giving them an audience.